How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to Boylite Hobby Time. Today I'm going to be using this replica Peacemaker as a wild imaginary western prop. Just to clarify, this revolver shoots BBs, not bullets. BBs and bullets are different. It's an air gun, not a real firearm. With that cleared up, let's dive in. While this very convincing replica does fire BBs, it's still not a toy. It comes with these clever shells that are an extension of the barrel. To fire the BBs, you must stick them into the back of the shell. The air passes through the back of the shell, pushes the BB down the barrel, and I think it's pretty clever. All that being said, I will not have any BBs or CO2 in the Peacemaker while I'm working on it, but you better believe I will be firing it at the end of the video. And if you're wondering why my voice is a little lower than normal, it's because I'm currently sick, which I don't mind because I think it makes me sound a little more cinematic. But let's be real, I probably just sound sick. Today's video is mostly going to be about customizing this holster to fit into the wild imaginary western universe that I have been creating. I'll explain the functionality of these upgrades as I go. To begin with, I decided to make a removable box that will cover the battery housing that will power the lights. I used a small sprue tree from an old model kit, and I pruned the ingrown branches using a pair of nippers. I honestly should have worn eye protection while doing this because those little plastic pieces were traveling almost as fast as the BBs that I will be shooting later. Once all the large pieces of plastic were gone, I cleaned up the edges with an X-Acto knife, followed by a light sanding till the plastic rim was ready to be attached to the belt. I wanted a way that was a little more reliable and flexible than superglue to attach this frame to the belt, so I drilled a hole in each corner of the frame, then I used that as a jig to drill corresponding holes into the leather itself. Once all of the holes had been drilled, I used some copper wire and I threaded it through the back of the belt into each of the holes in the plastic frame. Once they were all through, I bent them nice and snug, and I glued them in place, and I snipped off the excess. I wanted to run the actual wires that were carrying the electricity on the inside of the belt, which would give me the ability to hide them and run them where I wanted, without being constrained to the paths of the big bold red wires, which I will be adding later for cosmetics. After gluing the battery pack to the leather, it was time to begin working on the box that will sit around this whole thing and hide the batteries and also hold the lights. Although when I first started the build, I wasn't planning on having the lights being a part of the box, but I changed that later on. I used some 040 styrene, which I cut into 4 strips, and I began constructing the walls of the box using some plastic weld to join the corners. I used some thicker pieces of styrene cut at a 45-degree angle on the ends to give the box some dimension and visual interest. In order to get this thing to stay put, but also be removable for when it's time to change the batteries, I added some little hooks to the frame on the belt. I also added some little styrene studs to the inside of the outside box. When the two pieces are fit together and slid down, they lock in place, just like so. Next, I got out my bits box to look for some greeblies, and admittedly, I ended up not adding many greeblies, in fact just one, but sometimes less is more. But this is not one of those times. I should have added more. I added a lid to the box, but for some reason my camera wasn't recording, so you'll just have to take my word for it. When the lid was on, I scored it with a plastic scribing tool from Tamiya, a tool which I have found requires more delicacy to use than I possess. I then added that one greebly I mentioned earlier, which unfortunately I had to go back and remove when I decided to add the lights. The battery cover was looking pretty good, so it was time to move on to the wires. But not the real wires, the fake wires. Well, technically they're real wires, but they won't be carrying any electricity. They're just there to make a visual impact from a distance. These first 2 wires that I added drop down from the battery pack to somewhere behind the holster, which has an in-universe purpose that I will explain a little later in the video. I decided to use the same LEDs that I used on my monster hunting cowboy rifle. They have a fun motion effect. The light travels from one end to the other. I was also considering adding some of these little LED bloodworms, but decided against it in the end. I added an additional wire going off to the right that will be attached to a toggle switch that turns the lights on and off. I was considering how I should mount this to the leather, but in the end I opted to cut a small hole for the switch to pass through all the way to the back, and I'm very happy with the snug fit. I widened the hole on the switch housing that the other end of that red wire will go into, and then I dry fit all of the pieces in place. I'm leaving the battery housing and the switch separate so that I can remove them for the painting stage. The next step was to work on the lights, and while I do that, I'm going to explain to you the in-universe function of this little machine. In the Wild Imaginary West, monster hunters add things to their equipment to interact with their force stalls or improve their weapons to help them fight monsters. In this case, the ammunition that this revolver uses is very special. They have a core that can be electrified and charged up using an induction coil that sits on the holster just below the battery box. The bullets lose their charge after a short amount of time, so they're charged up right before an anticipated monster encounter. The outer shell of the bullet breaks when it makes contact with the target, and it releases the built-up energy, creating a shock effect that amplifies the stopping power of the bullet, meaning a relatively small round from a revolver can take down a far bigger opponent than usual. There's typically only enough power in a battery pack to charge 6 rounds, so this function is only used when absolutely necessary, or when extra batteries are available. There are many other awesome features of the weapons of the Wild Imaginary West that I'm very excited to share with you all soon. I was recently sent a care package with some awesome goodies from Terraintronics. You should definitely go check them out. I'm excited to use all the things that I was sent soon, but for this project, I just needed these nice wires. I soldered the LEDs into their positions and carefully added a bead of solder onto each of the terminals. I had already added little holes underneath these terminals for the wires to pass through, which allowed me to keep everything hidden and clean inside the box. Because the battery box and the switch had been painted black, it was okay to wire them up. I installed the switch permanently, and I finished connecting all the wiring from the battery to the switch, and then from the switch to the lights. I made sure to test my circuit the whole time so that I didn't end up here and find myself disappointed. I then added some heat shrink over all of the remaining connections, and I closed up the box, and then it was time to add a little bit of paint. I gave the box and the switch a quick overbrushing of gunmetal, followed by some brown and purple oil washes, which will look better once they're dry. And speaking of dry, I dusted up the whole thing, belt included, using a light, warm clay pigment powder from Vallejo. I both activated and removed some of the pigment powder using some isopropyl alcohol and a paper towel. I didn't want it to look too dusty. After the dust, I added some bullets. These are courtesy of my monster hunting rifle, which happened to use the exact same fake bullets as the revolver, which is nice. That was pretty much the belt and holster done, so then it was time to work on the revolver. The only change I'm going to be making on this bad boy is I'm going to be taking these perfectly clean, smooth plastic pieces and making them not perfectly smooth or clean. I wanted to have the Boyle Eye Hobby Time cattle brand on the handle, but that first required there to be a Boyle Eye Hobby Time cattle brand, so I quickly made one. I decided to go with the BHT monogram, meaning I combined all of the letters into one symbol. All I had to do was flip the B around, and I had my monogram. I thought I was going to need a lot more tries than this, so I used an entire sheet of paper just for that. I drew my nice little BHT monogram on both of the handle pieces, and then I broke out my Dremel, along with some engraving bits, and of course I threw on my glasses, because I don't want plastic pieces in my eye. Along with the BHT cattle brand, I also wanted to add a design to the rest of the handle. So it may not have been my best decision ever, but I decided to freehand the design using the Dremel directly onto the plastic. While the design doesn't look as nice as I had envisioned it would, I still like it. It looks kind of like it was hand-carved by a cowboy with an artistic bent out in the plains by some campfire. While the owner of this revolver may not be a professional artist, I can tell you two things he is a professional at: monster hunting and gunslinging. And this monster hunting gunslinger just heard of a town nearby that got completely overrun by a gang of dirty outlaws. So after he takes care of some business, he can call it good.
Hello, Liza, how do you do? I'm writing you a letter, I hope it reaches you. I know it's been a long time since you heard from me. I'm still kicking around here in Tennessee. I heard you got a new place, I heard you got a new job, I heard you got a haircut, and it looks real nice. Are you ever lonely? Do you ever think of me? I heard you got a new man, I hope they treat you right. And before you toss this letter away, there's something that I've got to say. An aeroplane shooting across the sky can surely take your body to a new place for a while. But some things stay no matter where you go. Do you still love me, Liza, babe? Please tell me yes or no. When the world turns ugly, we turn inside, try to find a good thing we can stand behind. All my friends tell me she's the one that got away, but you never left me like a ghost you stay. There's nothing else worth thinking of.
That is it for this video. Thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for enduring my sick voice this whole time. Huge shout out as always to my patrons. You guys are the best. Have an awesome week, everyone. I'll see you next time.